My name is Logan Hayes. I'm 34, a former Marine, and I just found out that my parents left everything to my sister. Not just the house or the cars, but the entire family farm, the land, the assets, the business, everything. Me? I got a barn. Not the nice one with the red roof where we kept the horses. No. I got the old, caved-in shed in the back pasture that hadn't seen a paintbrush since before I was born. The day I read the will, I couldn't speak. I stared at the paper while the lawyer looked at me with that rehearsed sympathy they teach in law school. My sister Lily didn't say a word either. She just stood there, arms crossed, not a flicker of surprise in her eyes. I walked out of that office feeling like a ghost. A man who had served 2 tours, survived IEDs, and watched friends bleed out in the sand. But somehow, this barn was what my life was worth to the people who were supposed to know me best. When I got home, I told my girlfriend, Jen. She listened, nodded once, and asked if I was still planning to move back in with her since, clearly, I had nothing else going on. I didn't answer right away, and I guess that pause said everything. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and told me she was tired of pretending I was going anywhere in life. That I was just a burden with dog tags. Then she left. No tears, no goodbye, just a slammed door that rattled the glass in the kitchen window. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she used to keep her boots. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The silence felt louder than the artillery I remembered from overseas. It pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. And in that moment, it all collapsed at once. My parents were gone, my home wasn't mine. My future looked like a pile of splinters and rusted nails in a barn no one wanted. Everything inside me felt hollow. I had no idea what I'd done to deserve being cut out like that. But somewhere deep in that silence, a thought surfaced. What if the barn wasn't an insult? What if it were a message? I didn't believe it yet, not then. But something told me I had to find out. Growing up, I always knew Lily was the favorite. She was the kind of kid who made straight A's, could fix a tractor by 12, and knew how to talk to adults like she was born wearing work gloves. People called her gifted, said she had the Hayes blood in her veins, the kind of grit you need to run a farm. Me? I was the quiet one who asked too many questions, who loved stories, who cried when we buried the first family dog. I tried. I really did, but every time I asked Dad if I could help him with the crops, he'd wave me off and say, "Go help your mother in the kitchen." I still remember the day I overheard him talking to a neighbor. He said, "Lily's got hands like mine. Logan, though. Logan's got soft bones." That stuck with me. Not because it was cruel, but because he didn't even say it like he was mad, just like it was fact. My mom never contradicted him. She was soft-spoken, always humming while she cooked, folding laundry with a kind of grace you don't see much anymore. But she was quiet. She never told him to stop, never told him he was wrong, and so I stopped asking. By high school, I already knew I didn't belong there. Lily was running the farmer's market stand, making deals with suppliers, talking about profit margins. I was writing essays that teachers read out loud to the class, then tossing them in the trash because Dad didn't think words paid bills. I remember bringing one home once. It was a story about the land, about legacy, about sons and fathers. I left it on the counter. He never said a word. When I turned 18, I enlisted. Not because I wanted to fight, but because it was the only way I could breathe. The day I left, Dad shook my hand like I was a neighbor, not his son. Mom hugged me, long and tight, but even then, her lips didn't move. No blessing, no be safe, just silence. I thought maybe when I came back, things would be different. I figured the uniform would mean something. That maybe now he'd see me as a man. But when I walked back through the front door 3 years later, all I got was a nod. Lily handed me a beer and said, "Welcome home, soldier." Like I'd just gotten back from a fishing trip. Nothing had changed. Lily was still the one he consulted when the barn roof needed fixing. Still the one he trusted with the bank meetings and harvest numbers. I was just there. A body passing through. I didn't fight it anymore. I figured some people are just born into roles, and mine was the one on the edge of every family photo. I kept my head down, did what I could, saved what little I made, and told myself I wasn't bitter. But that's the thing about resentment. It doesn't shout, it simmers. Now, looking back, I realize I wasn't trying to escape the farm. I was trying to escape being invisible. But you can't outrun a shadow that lives in your last name. The first time I saw the barn, I almost laughed. It wasn't a laugh that came from humor. It came from disbelief. The kind that scrapes your throat on the way out. The roof sagged like a dying lung. Mold crept up the wooden slats, and half the siding was rotted straight through. One of the doors hung off its hinges, swinging just enough in the breeze to squeal like it knew it was dying too. Inside, it smelled like old straw and animal piss. The floor was warped, uneven in places where water had eaten through the boards. Cobwebs clung to the rafters like ghosts. Mice darted past my boots, bold like they owned the place. I stood there, jaw tight, trying to understand how anyone could leave this to their son. Not even a shed with a lock, not even a piece of equipment worth scrapping. Just a shell of a building where things went to rot. Her voice came back to me then. "Jen." The last thing she said before walking out. "You're just a burden with dog tags." I didn't even fight her on it. I think some part of me agreed. I walked through the space like a stranger in my own inheritance. Every step felt like a punchline. The walls groaned. The light barely made it through the cracks. It was like the whole place was built out of my father's silence. I wanted to scream, or burn it down, or maybe just walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. But I didn't. I stood there, staring at the rot, letting it sting. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a building. This was about being told, one last time, exactly where I stood in this family. I was halfway through clearing out a pile of collapsed lumber near the back wall when I heard it. A creak that didn't match the rhythm of the rest of the barn. Sharper, lower, like something shifted under my weight that wasn't meant to move. I stepped back and pressed my boot into the same spot. Another creak, not the usual groan of old wood, but tighter, hollow. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt, revealing a plank that looked just a shade newer than the rest. The nails were old, but not rusted through like the others. Someone had replaced this board. Not recently, but definitely on purpose. My stomach nodded. I ran my fingers along the edges and felt the faint outline of a seam. I grabbed the claw end of a hammer and wedged it beneath the board. It didn't come easy. The wood splintered as it gave, resisting like it was guarding something. Finally, the plank popped loose with a dry snap, and a thin gust of cold air rose from the opening beneath. There was a hatch, square, made from the same wood as the floor, with an iron handle sunk flush into the surface. I stared at it, heart thudding. There was no lock, just a ring and a darkness below that made the air feel heavier. For a second, I didn't move. Every instinct in me said, leave it shut. This barn had been nothing but a wound, and maybe it was better to let it stay that way. But curiosity has a way of drowning reason. I wrapped my fingers around the handle. It was colder than it should have been. As I pulled, the hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in decades. The hatch lifted, revealing a set of stairs vanishing into shadow. I stood at the edge, staring down. There was no sound, just the faint scent of earth and old metal. My heart pounded like I was back in a firefight. Whatever was down there, it wasn't part of the joke. It was something else entirely. The first step groaned beneath my weight, but it held. I clicked on my flashlight and aimed it into the dark, revealing narrow wooden stairs descending into packed earth. The beam of light caught floating dust, thick as smoke, swirling in a place that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Each step I took felt like it pulled me further from the life I knew. The silence was absolute. No wind, no creaks, no mice, just my breath and the thud of my boots on wood. At the bottom, the walls widened into a small room, lined with stone and braced with rusted beams. The air smelled like old dirt and metal. I swept the light across the room and stopped breathing. Along the far wall, stacked neatly, were wooden crates and metal chests. Some were sealed tight. Others were slightly open, their contents wrapped in cloth and layered with dust. I moved closer, heart pounding. My fingers trembled as I pulled the lid off the first crate. Inside were bundles wrapped in oilcloth. I untied one and peeled it back. What spilled into my hands didn't feel real. Gold coins. Dozens of them. Heavy, cold, dull with age, but still shining under the flashlight's beam. I dropped to my knees and opened another. Silver bars. In another, stacks of bills, too old to be spent but clean enough to prove someone had cared for them once. There were ledgers too. Thick ones, leather-bound and yellowed at the edges. I opened one at random and found dates. Signatures, transaction records. My last name printed in ink beside land deeds, mining permits, even timber claims from nearly 100 years ago. I stumbled back and sat on the floor, stunned. This wasn't junk. This wasn't a forgotten pile of memories. It was a vault. A hidden legacy built generation by generation and buried beneath a place everyone else had written off. My throat tightened as I stared at it all. I thought about that will. About the barn, they said was all I deserved. About the look in Lily's eyes when she signed her name on papers that made her the rightful heir to everything above ground. But they were wrong. All of them. The real treasure wasn't the farm or the land. It was here, buried under dust and time. Left not to her, but to me. The letter was tucked between the pages of an old ledger, folded neatly, its edges soft from age but intact. My name was written across the front in my father's sharp, mechanical handwriting. I held it for a long time before opening it. The weight of it was somehow heavier than anything else in that vault. Logan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means the time has come for you to know the truth. What I left you was never meant to be a punishment. It was trust. You never asked for much. You never fought for attention or demanded more than what was given. I didn't always know how to speak your language. You weren't like Lily. She needed the world to see her. You needed time, space, and quiet. I should have told you I admired that. I know I didn't always show it, but I watched you. Every time you stood back so someone else could step forward. Every time you let the family have peace instead of proving a point. You were never weak. You were steady. And I built this for someone who wouldn't waste it. The barn was never supposed to be an insult. It was a gate. One that only you would open. Lily's strength is loud and useful, and I love her. But yours is quiet and sacred and built to carry weight without ever breaking. This vault, this history, these resources, they aren't just money. They are responsible. They are legacy. I believe you're the only one who could carry it without being crushed by it. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You already have. Forgive me for not saying this when I was alive. I didn't know how. But know that everything I did with the belief that you would find your way to this. I trust you, son, I always did. Dad, I don't know how long I sat there with that letter pressed to my chest. The air in the room didn't feel so cold anymore. For years, I thought I was the leftover. Now, I realized I had always been the one chosen. The next morning, I didn't leave the barn. I stayed, broom in hand, sweeping out years of dirt and decay with a focus I didn't recognize. Every board I patched, every nail I hammered, felt like stitching something back together inside me. I sealed the hatch first, reinforced it with new bolts and a locking frame I built from scratch. Then I laid the plank back down, pressed it flush to the floor, and covered it with the same dust I had swept away. To anyone else, it was just another piece of broken flooring. I didn't tell a soul. Not Lily, not Jen, not the lawyer or the bank. I kept it mine. Not out of spite, but out of respect. What lay beneath that barn wasn't just gold or records. It was trust. My father's last act of faith. The calls started coming a few days later. Lily wanted to talk. Said we should go over what I planned to do with the property. Asked if I needed help cleaning it up or maybe selling it. I told her I was fine, kept it short, polite, detached. Then Jen texted. Said she'd been thinking about me. Said she regretted how things ended. Said maybe we should talk. I stared at the screen, thinking about how fast people remember you when they think you're worth something. I never responded. Instead, I worked. I sanded window frames, replaced rusted hinges. I rebuilt the barn one piece at a time, not to restore it to what it was, but to make it mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fixing someone else's mistakes. I was building something I could carry forward. The anger faded, slow but steady. In its place came clarity. I didn't need to shout about what I had found. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had been trusted with a legacy no one else even knew existed. That kind of power doesn't need an audience. It needs stewardship. And I was ready to be that kind of man. Looking back now, I know that the test wasn't the barn or the gold hidden underneath it. It wasn't about what my father gave me or what he left out of the will. The true test was whether I could see past the surface and recognize what I had been trusted to carry. This wasn't about wealth. It was about being chosen, quietly and completely, by a man who never said the words out loud. That kind of trust doesn't come with applause. It comes with weight and responsibility, and the choice to rise to it or walk away. I used to think my life had no meaning outside of war or rejection. Now I understand the silence I grew up with wasn't absence. It was waiting for the right moment to reveal something bigger than pride, bigger than pain. So here's what I want to ask you. If someone handed you something the world laughed at, something they called worthless or broken, and it turned out to hold everything you never knew you needed, what would you do with it? Would you walk away, or would you honor the trust that no one else could see?